Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will go over the different opinions regarding whether a country should prioritise its economic or political rights. The biggest ideological clash that exists today is between the West and Eastern countries such as China. The West upholds the importance of political and civil rights for its people, for example the right to vote, express political opinions, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, etc. These are what are known as negative rights and are protections from the state. On the other hand, China emphasises positive rights, such as the right to a job, right to education and right to housing, and these are things that are known as positive rights because they are provided by the state. There is contention over whether political or economic rights should be the priority, and this episode will be dedicated to highlighting the different opinions on each side. A reminder that the aim of this episode is not to try and argue for or against either side, but rather to highlight the different opinions and provide a comparison between them. I will begin with the arguments that economic rights should be prioritised, followed by the arguments that political rights are more important, with a comparison at the end. The main argument regarding prioritising economic rights is that they are more important for a person's survival than political rights. An idea known as the full belly thesis is commonly used to explain this, and essentially it argues that there is no benefit to being able to vote and make your political opinions heard if you lack a full belly, hence the name, because you lack the necessary economic rights to survive. And as such, there's an argument that it's more important to provide jobs, homes and things that are necessary to survival when compared to things that aren't required for survival, for example, being able to speak your opinion in public. Furthermore, an argument posed by China is that if the government is doing well in providing people with jobs, food and education, then it doesn't need to provide its people with political rights. In Western democracies, a government's legitimacy comes from winning an election and having the population's support, or at least the majority or near majority, depending on how the system works. Bit iffy in most cases, but anyway. In China, the Communist Party claims its legitimacy comes from lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and providing continued and large-scale economic growth for its nation. Some also claim that suppressing political rights actually leads to more economic development. China often points to the inefficiency of US legislative bodies to highlight how democracy can prevent government from taking action. When no one can challenge the government and it can act quickly, this allows for more efficient responses and means that the country's government is far more able to respond quickly and effectively. For example, China dealt with the coronavirus much more efficiently than any Western country because it was allowed to force people to stay inside and, in fact, had people wear dog tags or ankle bracelets, whatever you want to call them, on their feet to ensure that they weren't leaving. This is something that simply would not be allowed in any Western country, which, while protecting political rights, means that it has taken far longer to get over this, and it means that China's economy has recovered far more quickly than Western economies, which are still being hampered by continuing lockdowns and other restrictions. Furthermore, from the standpoint of individual versus society, political rights can lead to people causing more problems to society. If someone is able to protest and strike, then they will be less effective workers, and it is argued that the nation will suffer as a result. These types of arguments don't rely much on individualism, as they claim that a person's role is in relation to society, and the bigger factor that society and the collective matters more than the individual, which is one of the big selling points of communism, hence it's popular in China. And as such, some claim that political rights, while potentially benefiting the individual, can be harmful to society if the individual disagrees with what is being done and takes action against it. And finally, some may claim that political rights are simply an artificial construct of the West. You only have the right to vote because a Western leader said so in the past. However, economic rights are integral to people's survival in the modern world, as previously mentioned, and as such, some would argue that there is a difference between these two types of rights, and economic rights are the ones which need to be more protected over the artificial political rights, given that economic rights provide real-world benefits and allow people to survive, while in this case, political rights are only negative in this viewpoint. Moving on to the idea that political rights are more important. Firstly, most of the arguments in favour of political rights centre around some form of self-determination. Although someone may be free to get a job, if they can't choose what job to get, where they live and how to live, then there is arguably very little freedom in their life. Political rights, therefore, to Western countries especially, are integral for people to choose how they live their lives, and the ability to choose how they live their lives, essentially, whether it's negative or positive freedom, the ability to simply choose how you live is very, very important and ingrained in Western cultures, and as such, they advocate that it is very important. Furthermore, some argue that political rights are actually essential for economic rights to be properly present. In countries with no political rights, workers cannot choose what type of economic system they have their economic rights in. For example, a communist state with economic rights still determines where and how people work, only that they give them a job. But with political rights, it provides them with the freedom to choose a system for themselves. Essentially, this idea that they go hand in hand, and that you can't have proper economic rights without proper political rights, and therefore political rights should be emphasised. And furthermore, this is advocated by the idea that political rights are necessary at all levels of development. In a country which is barely developed at all, economic rights may not be very helpful, because if there's only one type of job in a country, what is the point of having people be able to choose the job they take? It simply doesn't make sense. However, political rights are always necessary to ensure that there is an even distribution of wealth and that there is a fair and good society at all levels of development, because even when a country is very poor or when a country is very rich, these people would advocate that political rights and self-determination are always important. And this extends on to one of perhaps the main ideas, which is that the danger a lack of political rights poses to people in a country. Often, countries that prioritise economic rights over political rights are among the most persistent offenders of human rights breaches. Not always, but in a lot of cases. And as such, a lot of people in Western countries claim that this full belly thesis and all these arguments posed are simply a means to justify the continued oppression of their people by an authoritarian government. And as such, political rights are essential to ensure that people have basic fundamentals. Essentially, they may say, yes, it's important you don't starve, but it's also important that you can't be killed for speaking out against the government. Your life still isn't free, and you're still not living a proper life, but with political rights, you can be. And finally, political rights may be considered artificial, but they are still integral to humanity, just as economic rights are. Economic rights exist in the context of the system that they are made for, and as such, they are very similar to political rights. Economic rights exist, for example, to be able to choose a job and where you live, exist in a capitalist system, just as the right to vote exists in a democratic system. Therefore, both are integral to human existence and prosperity, given that they are designed to complement the system that we currently live in. And although both may be artificial, they are both still very important. Moving on now to the comparison. On the value of the individual, those countries which prioritise economic rights would essentially say that the individual's worth is less than society, and that individual political and civil rights are not as important as collective economic rights, and therefore that society should be prioritised. I may also go on to say, for example, that political rights can harm society if people overextend their individual rights. For example, through striking and through protesting, it can cause a lack of social cohesion. Strikes can harm firms and the economy, and arguments such as that. While those favouring political rights would say that the individual matters just as much, if not more, and that political rights are therefore integral to protect the individual both from society and from the state. On the idea of state power, those supporting economic rights would say that the state should have the power to act as necessary for its people. Essentially, they would advocate and have to claim that the state is good in this instance, and that it's more important that the state can respond quickly than there are many checks and balances. However, those on the other side would say that those checks and balances and all these means that democracy restrains the power of a government are integral to ensuring that a state does not become too powerful because they fear what may happen as a result. Extending on from this, on the benevolence of states, or the how good a state is essentially, those supporting economic rights have to argue and have to believe that states are good and care for their people economically. A state has to be good regarding the economic standards for its people to justify this argument. This is something China can do very well, as they can say that it has enjoyed almost non-stop and very high rates of growth throughout the last 20 years and even longer, and have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and as such they are a good state, and that they should be continued to allow to act and do so without the constraints that a democracy might bring. However, those on the other side would say that China particularly has been accused and has been exposed to be committing many breaches of different human rights. For example, the internment of Uyghur Muslims in education centres, concentration camps, whatever people may call them, it's still a breach of their human rights no matter which way you look at it. And as such, a lack of political rights is dangerous because states can become oppressive, even if they may start off benevolent. If there is no way that people can express their distrust in a government, they will either lose touch with their people or they may become more violent to hold on to power. Because if people start to demand political rights, what happens then? On the question of which right is more important, or self-explanatory, those supporting economic rights would say that political rights are worthless if you are hungry and unemployed, while those supporting political rights would say that economic rights are worthless if you don't have self-determination, and that economic rights are only important once it is built up to the point where you can choose to have a job if there are different jobs, but political rights are always present, no matter what economic situation. On the question of legitimacy, those in favour of economic rights say that a government's legitimacy comes from providing jobs and economic prosperity for its people. However, those supporting political rights say that it comes from democracy and being voted in, and that you may, for example, in the future, if China experienced a massive economic downturn, what happens then? Then on the idea of Western rights, those supporting economic rights say that political rights come from Western liberalism and aren't necessary. And those supporting political rights would say that political rights are very important, and again, they are built around the system that we live in, and although it may be a Western system that is predominant in the world, they should still exist given people's essentially basic morality. And essentially, if you look at universal morality or moral universalism, they would advocate, especially on that regard, that political rights are integral to protecting people. And then finally, on the question of can you have one without the other, those supporting economic rights say that you can have economic rights without political rights. However, those supporting political rights say that political rights exist at all levels of development, while economic rights may not. However, the rights are complementary with each other. Overall, states which advocate for economic rights and not political rights tend to be those in Eastern cultures and argue economic prosperity means they don't need political rights to legitimize the state, while those supporting political rights argue both are important and believe those advocating for only economic rights do it to allow their authoritarian regimes to continue. But ultimately though, where do you stand on this issue? Do you think political or economic rights are more important? And is there anything that I missed or got wrong or could do better? Let me know in the comments or on Twitter, and be sure to check back on Friday for the different opinions regarding Trump's lack of concession thus far following the presidential election. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.